Hi, this is a Curvy 4.1 tutorial showing some of the new features in Curvy 4. This tech pirate I made and sculpted in Curvy. The basic process I used, I sketched the forms over a background image, just drawing lines to create the forms, just a couple of curves for each part. And then move them next to each other to make an easily posable mannequin. Now I know I needed some props for this model, so I made some quick placeholders for the sword and the gun, just so I knew what I was doing when I was posing the model before I started sculpting. So the sword and the gun show off two ways you can make models in Curvy. One is the loft, which basically interpolates between two curves using a guide curve. And then you can use rulers on the curves you've drawn to tighten up their shapes. There I'm using the simple arc ruler. Then the gun was made using a slab, which makes sort of boxy extruded shapes. I've turned on precise lines and I'm holding down Control to draw straight line segments. Again, for the original, I traced over an imported background image. So that's basically how I sketched out the placeholder gun. And once I was ready with my mannequin, I then posed it to suit the composition I was working towards, which is basically these strong diagonals of the sword and the gun pointing against each other, and the figure striding or running forwards. So you can just use the rotate tool to pose individual parts. And if they're created with child objects, the child objects move too. Then I merged the parts and sculpted some details in. I'm not going to show you how I did the whole mesh. I've got other tutorials which show the techniques I used. But for now, we're going to look at the barbed wire, the chainsword, and the studs on his jacket. So first off, the barbed wire. This is quite a detailed object, but is fairly simple to make. So like other complicated objects, I'm going to start with making the smallest possible piece I can, which here is going to be one stretch of twisted wire. So we want a nice straight wire to start off with. So I use the ruler, change the width. It's still got quite a high resolution because we're going to be deforming it later. Control D to duplicate, move it into place. Now I'm going to join these lines together using Control J, or you can use the mesh join option. And once joined, I'm going to set a gradient on them with the gradient mask and twist them with the normal rotate tool. And because we've masked the top, it'll start twisting from there, and the bottom isn't masked, so that'll be left stationary. Just working out how many twists. I think I need one more twist. So this gives the main structure of the wire. Then we need another wire looped round for the spikes. So I'm going to switch to the top view and draw a spiral around the wire, like a loop the loop. You'll see how this all works. Now, when I move one end of the wire up using soft move, it's created a spiral. And then we can press the number keys to get different radii of the soft move tool, with 1 being a single point and 0 being the whole line, and the numbers in between to change how much the line is affected. I'm just moving this spike into place. Control D, copy, and move another twist to the end, so that end will cover over the join between the wires. Now we want to make a long length of wire, so I shrink the original down with S, with R, just shrink, and do a duplicate proxy, switch the mode to array, set the number, and move the offset. This is moving offset A. Bake the action twice and join the resulting parts. This gives this nice strip of wire. Now we're going to repeat the twisting trick to make the wire more uneven. Let's give it a few more twists. This makes the spikes jut out in all different directions. And then we're going to repeat the spiral trick to make it into a twisting loop. So we're going to fit to rails, draw a curve. First curve we draw up the original object. We want that first curve to be nice and straight, so just use the ruler to straighten it out. The second curve determines where the object will be deformed to. So in our case we're going to draw a spiral again, switch out to the top view, and drag that into place with the soft move tool. Stretching that out. Stretching out the ends. And this is giving us a coil of wire. Now I think my wire has been stretched out too far, so I'm going to shorten that spiral with the scissor tool. And that's right, trim it down a bit. And now it's ready to place on my model. Again, once I'm done with the fit to rails, I can bake that action so it turns it back into a mesh. And I can make a copy to make the wire mesh more dense. I can even make another copy to have some loose flailing bits of wire coming off the hand. And there's the finished wire in place, wound around his arm, with an extra coil coming off. So next we're going to look at the Chainsword. In this case it's a pirate scimitar. And we've already seen how to make the bulk of the blade, which I made for the stand-in version. I'll just make it again here. I'm using the redraw a simple arc to smooth that curve out carefully. I cloned the curve, making a copy. I need some more curve to go along the end, so I'm dragging off out the end with a soft move tool I pressed 1 to give it a radius of 0 to pull out a single point. Then I smoothed the curve to give it some density again. Then using soft move and the curve rulers, I think I'm going to use the circular arc ruler here to shape the curve. I find using the simple arc, you can use it to a point and it sort of tends to sharpen up the point at the end. Adding some depth. I notice I've bent my lathe loft out of place, so I'm just going to squash it in the Z direction to flatten out the curves, so it's nice flat, smooth loft. So for the handle, I used a slab. Again, just drawing around the outline. And then using the curve rulers to tidy up the lines I've drawn. I want to cut a hole for your hand, so I'm going to clone that curve, shrink it down, and then trim off the ends with the scissors. And that's cut a hole. Just tweaking the depth and the bevel to get it the right size. And just going to draw a lathe for the handle. I used a Curvy map to add the Ripley effect on the handle later. Okay, that's just about right. Now my original sword had this sort of border around the edge. I'll just change the colour so you can see it more easily. And it had an inset cutaway area. So again, I'm going to use the soft move tool. I'm going to press 1 to set the radius to the smallest possible size. And that lets me drag out single points on the curve. Then the ruler tool. Now to make the borders, I copied the curve by selecting the curve and doing Control-C, and then I pasted the curve on top of the original second curve, and then offset it a bit. So again, I'm copying one curve and pasting it onto the other curve, basically to end up with two identical curves in the same place, and then drag it into place. So this side only has a short area next to the cut-in, so I'm just clipping that down with the scissors, and then using the soft move tool with the smallest radius to drag in single points just to tidy up the shape of those lines. Again, it's easier to see the objects if I set them to different colours. Just set their position and their depth correctly. Now I'm ready to add the motor, which is just a couple of boxes. And then finally, with the slab object, I'm going to make a part of the cutting blade of the sword. Single tooth, use the rulers to sharpen up the shapes. Turn down the bevel and the depth to make it a thin blade. I've turned off snap rotation so I can precisely tweak that into place and scale it down so it's nice and small. Again, the depth is a bit too high, tweak that down. Finally, I want to make lots of copies of this, so I'm going to use duplicate proxy and change the mode to array rails. So this method requires a curve that the objects will follow. So I'll draw the curve along the sword and back up the back of the cut-in. Again, change the colours so I can see what's going on. Straighten out that part and use the curve simple arc ruler to straighten out the rest. Now I'm going to set my multiple. No, at the moment they're appearing all over the place because I haven't set the end location. So I'm going to drag the end location into place and rotate it to match the position of the curve. And you can see all the teeth line up. Increase the number to fully populate the sword. Just tweaking the rotation. When I'm happy with the way the teeth are laid out, I can bake the action, and that will turn the teeth into proxies. And then I can delete any which I don't need, because they're all separated out now. Just freeze the loft so I don't accidentally select that. When I was completely finished with that, I would probably bake out the proxies into mesh as well, using bake action again. So that's the sword done. Lastly, I'm going to show you how I place these studs onto his jacket using fit to surface. So they're tightly following the sort of folds of his jacket over his shoulder, which you could do by hand, but it would take a while, especially as I wanted them in a nice neat grid. So again, using a cube, gradient select, scaling it down, make a nice triangular stud, duplicate proxy, duplicate array. We want a 4x4 array. I'm going to set offset A sideways and offset B downways. Bake this action twice to turn it into meshes, and we're going to make a pattern out of this, so we don't need half of them. Once they're ready, I'm going to join them all together with Ctrl J, or mesh join. And then I just need to move them into place. Change the colour so they stand out better. Just going to move these into place above the jacket. Just rotate them up to line up with the jackets. And then I also want to rotate the viewport so it's it lines up, because the dropped surface command will drop it in the direction the perspective view is looking in. So let's just tweak that so it's right above the studs. When it's all lined up, use the mesh fit to dropped surface. If you got slightly wrong with your angle of the view, it might embed them in the surface, but you can rotate them back into place. And then they follow the surface nicely. You could drop much more complicated shapes as well, if you wanted to do some like embossed motifs and such. And there's the finished model. Thanks for watching. I've got lots more Curvy 3D tutorials on my channel.